Hello, I'm Ben Speirs,
And I'm Robert Manta, and this is Tree Throw in Montana Spruce Fir Forest.
examining sediment movement in southwest Montana from tree throw. Here's our problem statement. While some of the general relationships between tree throw and soil depth have been explored, we want to know, does tree species in itself have an impact on the amount of soil that is displaced by a given tree throw? Would this mean that in certain forests, erosion rates are greater due to tree throw than in other forests? I don't know. That hasn't been studied extensively yet. Also, the associations between specific lithology and the amount of sediment to be uprooted by a given tree throw have not been looked into very much. Therefore, we're looking in this project at the relationships between tree species, the underlying lithology, tree size, and tree throw.
Introduction. Tree throw is a geomorphological process that occurs when a tree is uprooted, usually by the wind, and then rips sizable amounts of sediment out of the ground when it falls. So as its roots come out of the ground, the tree doesn't snap, but its entirety of its root base comes out too, and rips a bunch of sediment out of the ground and throws it downhill or downslope. And the scientific community, for the most part, understands how tree throw actually works, but there's not a lot of research that actually go into the long-term effects of tree throw on the surrounding environment and the differences between species of tree and how much they actually throw. And our interest falls on trees around the Bozeman area, specifically north of the Highlight Range in South Cottonwood Creek. This is the extent of our study area. This is South Cottonwood Canyon, and this is Bozeman, so it's not very far south of Bozeman, and there are a lot of slopes with trees in this area. And we also look to understand several factors and how they influence tree throw, including lithology, species of tree, gradient of the slope, and rock percentage in the throw. And with all of these factors, we hope to better understand what's causing tree throws to be large or small and how significant each factor is actually to increasing tree throw amount. So this figure is just looking at the local lithology, and we were generally in this area with MMC and ML, which is Lodgepole Limestone is ML and Mission Canyon is MMC. These are both part of the Madison group, which is mostly limestone that was formed 360 to 323 million years ago. And this is just a general picture of a tree throw. You can see the pit that's formed and all the sediment that comes up with the tree.
So now for our methods. So we measured the width and the length of the mound as well as the depth. We also got the diameter of the tree as well as the rock percentage visually and the underlying lithology. And lastly, gradient. And we plugged these values of length, width, and depth into a hemiellipsoid equation. This is kind of visual representation of that that has been used in previous studies involving tree throw to get a approximate volume of the tree throw mound.
This is our results and analysis, and through analyzing our fieldwork, we actually found several correlations. The first of them being that Engelmann spruce, one of the two tree species that we measured, throws on average about 483.49 cubic inches less than subalpine fir. So this difference is significant, especially for two trees that are in a very similar environment and grow with similar circumferences, similar heights. So what's actually causing them to throw differently, we're not sure about yet, but if we did have more funding and more time for research, then we'd probably be able to figure it out. But it is a very good start to finding that there is differences between species. We also found that tree circumference did not have a large impact on tree throw amount, which we did not expect to find. We actually thought that the bigger circumference of the tree would mean more roots, and because tree throw is dependent on root depth and strength, we believe that trees with larger circumference would have deeper roots and more tree throw, but our data actually indicated that this is not the case with these two species. One factor that we do need to consider is how long trees were uprooted for, as if they've been uprooted for too long, the pits can fill with water, or sediment can get washed out, or an animal can burrow in. Any of these things can happen and change the size of the pit. So getting to them right when they throw is probably the best method for actually measuring these, but we didn't have that luxury. Something that we found very interesting in our data is that there's no correlation between volume and gradient, but studies before us have found there's a positive correlation. So that's something we'd also need to look into further. A variable we did not expect to return surprising results was rock percentage versus tree throw values, but as figure 8 over here shows, there is an interesting quadratic relationship where trees at low rock percentages, at almost 0%, there were higher tree throw amounts than at moderate percentages, around 5 to 20%. But at some point when the throw reaches 15% rock, tree throw began to increase again. So we don't really know why this is happening, but we can observe that it was happening with the trees we looked at. And the lithology in the area that we were looking at that was in the tree throw was mostly macritic limestone from the Madison Formation, as we talked about. And this is fairly light and not as strong as the heavy intrusive igneous and metamorphic rocks that you'd see further into highlight. This change in rock composition could lead to changes in tree throw and the relationship between the rock percentage and the throw volume. And finally, this is just looking at sources of error. There were some trees that threw upslope, which would work against a positive correlation with gradient and throw volume. There was also no way for us to know how much sediment was in the pit when the tree originally threw. None of the pits were perfect hemiellipsoids, so measurements can't be perfectly exact due to possible irregularities in pit shape. And one of the pits that we know of had been burrowed into by an animal, which could have cleared out sediment and increased the size. The tree throw was also sparse, so we weren't able to get as many samples as we wanted for each species, and our slope measurements weren't perfect, as the slope sometimes did change between the start and end of a tree throw pit.
Alrighty, so some of the conclusions we came up with. It is hard to make conclusions with certainty because we only had 10 tree throws to look at. But as Robert said earlier, our data indicates that higher average tree throw volume for subalpine fir as opposed to Engelmann spruce. This might indicate the possibility of differing root structures between the two species, and over a large area, maybe increased erosion rates in a fir forest versus a spruce forest. So here's sort of a visualization of our conclusions that we found from our data. We saw that subalpine fir seemed to create larger throws, as indicated by this diagram. We didn't see that a larger circumference resulted in more sediment uprooted, and we also did not see, as with a steeper gradient, more sediment uprooted, which was surprising.
So for future work, there is a lot that can be done, and there is a lot of work that we could do to discover more about tree throw. If we had more time and funding, ideally we would have monitored this area and several more local environments to catch trees right when they throw so that nothing happens to the pit and no sediment is moved. We can just get the exact values. We'd also like to explore a lot more lithologies to determine how much rock type actually does play a part in controlling the tree throw volume. There's really so much that we can learn from studying tree throw, and we've really only cracked the surface with what can be discovered with this study. So that's about it.
Here are references. Thank you.